If you're studying for the INBDE, I highly recommend INBDE Bootcamp, an all-in-one study resource that will help you pass your exam. Use coupon code MENTALDENTAL for 10% off. Hey everyone, Dr. Ryan here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being here. In this video, I want to share actually my favorite study hack that I've used throughout dental school and beyond, and I want to share it with you because I really genuinely think it can transform the way that you study and prepare for your board exam. And so when I was in dental school, what I did was of course study the material, but beyond just memorizing stuff, I loved doing practice questions. And to this day, I think practice questions are probably the highest yield way you can spend your time when you study. Now, the issue with doing that in dental school is I didn't have access to very many practice questions. A couple of faculty might release an old test that they gave years ago, or they'd give you a little quiz assignment or a homework assignment that has some questions attached to it. But usually I didn't have very many to work with. And so with those questions, what I learned to do is essentially turn them inside out, meaning I take a question, I answer it, but then I go beyond just answering the question. I flip the question. So if there's A through D and I select the answer as B, it's correct, I go back and I say, well, why is A wrong? Why is C wrong? Why is D wrong? Maybe I go into the question stem and I change the question stem, the actual question, in order to make one of the other answer choices correct. And then I'll go on a tangent related to a topic from that question and explore it deeper and write my own questions based on that. I'll give you some examples of what this looks like. But really taking the question and getting as much information out of it as possible, squeezing all the information you can out of each and every question is how I prepared for my dental school exams, how I prepared for my board exam, and I think it could really help you out. So let me show you some examples of this in action. So here we have a question and it reads like this: a patient frequently consumes acidic beverages. At what approximate pH does enamel begin to demineralize? And we have the options of 7.0, 6.5, 5.5, and 4.0. So a couple of key points in this question stem. I'm looking at acidic beverages and I'm thinking, okay, we're probably dealing with the Stefan curve, and we're looking at specifically pH, critical pH that is, for the enamel layer. So there's a couple different numbers that we memorize for this. For the enamel layer, we're thinking 5.5. That is our carbonate substituted hydroxyapatite. That's the answer we're looking for if it mentions enamel. So at pH of 5.5, which is, fairly acidic, we're going to start to see acid attack against the enamel. So we could get the question right and move on to the next one. Or we maybe get the question wrong, and then we stop and say, okay, let's read the explanation, if this is one of my questions on the Academy, for example, and we'll learn what we can from it and then move on. Well, I want to go a step further than that. So after we deal with this question, I want to expand on it. And I say, well, what happens if we change the word enamel to dentin? Now what happens? So at what approximate pH does dentin begin to demineralize? Well, dentin is a more vulnerable layer, so it's going to experience acid attack at a more relatively neutral pH than enamel. So instead of 5.5, it's actually 6.5 if we're talking about dentin, or if we're talking about cementum. Both of those answers would be 6.5. So just changing that one word makes the answer choice B the correct answer. What if we change this to fluoride substituted hydroxyapatite, where we have fluorapatite, fluoride reinforced enamel? That's going to be stronger and it's going to require a more acidic pH to start to attack that enamel and demineralize it. So then we would be looking for 4.5, which is not an answer choice here, but that's what we would be looking for if that were the question stem. So now you can see that I've just turned this question into a full-on review of the Stefan curve and different critical pHs, just by playing with the wording of the question stem a little bit. Let's look at another one. Decreasing the radius of a blood vessel will A, increase flow, B, decrease resistance, C, increase resistance, or D, have no effect. So with this one, we're talking about a physiology concept, and the formula that we use to look at this would be blood pressure is equal to cardiac output times total peripheral resistance. Basically, the pressure in your cardiovascular system is equal to how hard the heart is pumping and working times or multiplied by the amount of resistance in the system. So if we decrease the radius of a blood vessel, we're shrinking the surface area and the volume, and it's going to be harder to pump blood through that vessel. So are we going to increase flow? No, we're actually going to be decreasing blood flow. We're going to be not decreasing resistance, we're going to increase the resistance because there's less room for the blood to flow through if we decrease the radius. We vasoconstrict a blood vessel. So the correct answer to this one is C, but let's not stop there. Let's flip this question inside out. So what happens if we are talking about a blood vessel that's supplying the cardiac tissue? What happens if the radius of those vessels get decreased, whether it's due to vasoconstriction or due to a plaque buildup in the arteries? Well, what happens if not enough blood is getting to the heart? Okay, that's called angina. So it starts to cause chest pain. And if it's left untreated, it could cause a heart attack where the heart doesn't get enough oxygen. Why is that the case? Well, blood carries oxygen via hemoglobin, and if not enough oxygen is getting to the heart, it can't function properly, which causes chest pain as your body's way of warning you that things are not going as they should. Okay, then we can go another step further. Well, what is the treatment for that? If we have a patient in the chair who is experiencing angina, what would we give to them? Well, nitroglycerin is a good option because it is a vasodilator. It's going to open up those blood vessels and allow blood to flow through there, decreasing resistance, making it so blood can carry oxygen to the heart and give that patient some relief. Okay, how is that nitroglycerin delivered? How would we administer it? Usually with a sublingual tablet. And so you see, as we go kind of deeper and deeper, we can connect all these different categories together. We're talking about physiology, now we're talking about medical management, we're talking about pharmacology, and we allow all these different things to synthesize together. And this is one of the keys to remembering what you study. So often when I'm tutoring my amazing students, their number one concern or complaint is as soon as I leave a topic to go study something else, because this exam is so broad and covers so many categories, I start to forget what I learned last week or even yesterday. And I tell them the key is to constantly review old material. So on a day that you're studying new stuff, well, spend 90% of your time learning new things, but spend at least 10% of the time going back over the stuff that you learned previously the day before or the week before, and look at those old flashcards as you write out new flashcards. Go back to them periodically so you continue to relearn and remind yourself of the things that you have learned already. Because if you leave that pile of flashcards alone after having gone through them once or twice and you never touch them again for 1 or 2 months, well, you are going to forget that stuff. So you constantly have to have a little bit of recap time, a little bit of review each and every study day. But going back to this concept of flipping questions inside out, hopefully you can see how much value there is to be gained from doing this. Instead of just blowing through 10 practice questions in 5 minutes, I might spend, if I want to allot the time for my specific study session this way, which I certainly recommend doing time to time, you could take 5 practice questions and spend 30 minutes on them, just taking your time dissecting each answer choice, rewording the question, crossing out a word and changing it to make the answer different, going on these little tangents, getting the different clinical disciplines. You could bring in endodontics and periodontics and talk about diagnosis and treatment planning and so many things that you can wrap in. Ethics you can bring in there. There's so much that you can do with these practice questions, and you can gain so much knowledge by writing your own questions and going on these deeper dives. Now, you certainly don't want to go down the rabbit hole of learning all this nuanced information that's not relevant to the test. But if you can stay in the realm of dentistry and the high yield stuff that I always teach you, bringing that into the fold of these practice questions is the way to go. Now, I want to end this video with a chicken wing analogy, actually. I know maybe not all of you like chicken wings. I love chicken wings, and there's two types of people who eat chicken wings. Follow me for a second. The first type of person is the one who eats the easy stuff. They just eat the meat, they move on to the next wing, but they leave a lot of stuff behind. They leave some of the grizzle and the tendons and the things that are harder to chew, and they just kind of leave that alone, throw it on the plate, grab the next one. And there's the other type of person, who is me, who will eat every piece of tendon and grizzle until there is nothing left. You have just the bone part and everything else is picked apart. There's literally nothing else you could get off of that chicken wing. So my analogy extends to how you study. You could be the type of person who sees a question, answers it, moves on, forgets about it. Or you could be the second type of person who sees a practice question, you answer it, you maybe write it down again if you've got it wrong, and you keep an error log of the things that you have gotten wrong so you can track if there's some pattern to why you're getting certain questions wrong, if it's certain wording that trips you up, and then go a step further and say, well, what else could this question relate to? How can I reword it? All of those things. You squeeze out all the value from every single question. And you might say, well, Dr. Ryan, that sounds great. I just don't have the time to do that. I only have 30 minutes a day or an hour a day. I don't have the luxury of doing this. And to that I say, I hear you. There's a lot of people I work with who are full-time assistants, parents, and you're short on time. It's just the reality of the situation. You have to feed the dog, and you have to take care of the kids and go to work. And you say, I'll get through as many practice questions as I can. I'll answer them, get it right, get it wrong, read the explanation quick, and move on to the next one. And sometimes that is real life, but you also need uninterrupted time where you can go deeper with these questions. You need that. And my encouragement to you is, if you're in those situations, you cannot do this alone. You have to ask loved ones for help, feeding the dog, watching the kids. Get somebody who can take care of those things for just a few hours, so you have uninterrupted time where you can dive deep into this stuff, because otherwise this exam is too hard to try to tackle it all yourself. It's too hard to give it your second or third best, to give it the last bit of energy you have every day after you're exhausted from doing everything else, and it's the last 30 minutes you have where you're just barely making it by. That is just an uphill battle that is unwinnable. If you can find somebody or a group of people who can come alongside you and help you with those other things and get you the time that you need to prep, that is so crucial And that might be the missing piece for you to make this happen. I don't mean to say you have to study 8 hours a day for 7 days a week. That's unrealistic as well, because you'll get burnt out that way. I need 1 to 2 hours of your time every day for 5 days of the week, and then you take one day in the weekend where you can just marathon for eight hours straight, and then another day where you're resting and you're taking a break from studying new content. You just review some old stuff, and you mostly take a rest day, because we all need that during the week as well. That's a very realistic schedule that you can make work even if you're full-time working, and that's what you need to do, whether you have uninterrupted blocks of time where you can afford to go deep without interruption, without distraction, where you can sit down and do these practice questions for an hour straight. If you're doing a marathon study day, for 5-6 hours straight with a couple breaks in between, like you're doing the exam, but in a quiet space where you can really focus and not be distracted. I'm way off of my script, by the way. This is not exactly what I had planned to talk about in this video, but I think it's really, really important. I'm just speaking from my heart right now because I feel like somebody out there needs to hear this, that you're not alone and that you can do this, but you need support around you to make this happen. But going back to my study hack, hopefully this is something that resonates with you. If you're not sure, just try it. Give it a try with just a couple random practice questions. It can really work for any question that you see. But I encourage you to give this a try and see how it helps you. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I loved doing it from the beautiful Carolinas. This has been Dr. Ryan, and until next time, God bless you. Stay strong and healthy. Keep working hard. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.